Last week we talked about how to know when you're ready to retire, but this week, beware of the pitfalls that can derail your retirement. Stay tuned to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, here with my good friend and co-host Sarah Samuels. And today, we're going to identify some of the pitfalls that you need to plan for, ideally before retirement. Why? Because these are pitfalls that, if you're not aware of them, can derail what might look like the beginning of a successful retirement.
Dave, it's wonderful to be here with you and, of course, with all of our listeners. And like you mentioned, last week we focused on how you can know when you're ready to retire. But this week's show is really for those that are in retirement, because we want you to be aware of potential risk factors, because the last thing that we want is for their retirement to get derailed.
That's right. And most of these you could plan for before you retire, which is ideal. Now, of course, if you're listening and you're already retired, you still want to be aware, because there's still some things you could do to protect yourself. It starts with bear markets, right? Market corrections. So you have garden variety bear markets. You have what happened in 2020 when the pandemic started. You have bear that are event triggered. You have bear markets like, I think it was 2022 when the S&P was down 18%, but then quickly recovered. But then you have longer bear markets. You have those when the tech bubble burst, and we were underwater for 7 years at the beginning of the century, and the financial crisis hit, and we're underwater for another 6, right? Those are bear markets. Tied closely to that, Sarah, are recessions, which can, a big part of what can lead to a longer-term bear market.
And I think a lot of our listeners are worried about those things, like stock market crashes. They're worried about a recession. So if you're listening to the show, if you have a concern about retirement, if you're worried about recessions, we encourage you to call in to our Ask Dave hotline. The phone number is 800-822-1111. We can help get your question answered, even get you connected with one of our retirement income source specialists located in Connecticut.
Yeah.
We actually have a question from Paul in Connecticut, which really relates to this, and maybe other people listening feel the same way. But he says, Dave, I'm really worried about the markets dropping. I'm already retired. How can I help get rid of this concern?
All right, Paul, let's talk about this. And I want to just say for our listeners here, I just want to let you know, too, that my lovely co-host here jumped the gun just a little bit with this Ask Dave, because there are other things other than market drops and corrections and recessions that can affect things. So stay with us. We're going to talk about those other things coming up in just a minute. But, Paul, for you, first of all, let's talk about bear markets first. Bear markets and pullbacks. Usually with bear markets and pullbacks, you have bonds and bond-like instruments like preferreds that pay a fixed income payment, whether it's called an interest or a dividend, and that comes to you. So in a bear market, those usually don't change or get eliminated, and your income stays exactly the same. So you don't really have to worry about, so yeah, your statements come and your portfolio is down in value just a little bit, and maybe that's that doesn't feel good, but it shouldn't really affect your retirement, just a bear market. Bear markets come all the time, sometimes not even due to economics, just because the market growth gets ahead of itself and now it is a healthy pullback, right? But Paul, there's also recessions that cause bear markets, right? When the economy changes. And whereas a lot of what I said is true, it's a little different with a recession. So yes, bonds and bond-like instruments might have a fixed interest payment or fixed dividend. That's unlikely to change. It can't really change unless there's a bankruptcy. So if you've chosen good, solid companies for your part of your portfolio that includes bonds and bond-like instruments, well then you should be fine. But the stock side is where some things change. In a bear market, common stocks can cut dividends, right? So your dividends that you're getting, the income you're getting from the dividends on the common stocks can change in a bear market. They can go down. So you've got to be careful. So this is where if you're protecting yourself against a recession, you want to turn around and look at these companies and make sure they're stable companies that have a long history of paying their dividend and maybe even a long history of increasing their dividend as time goes on. So again, Bear market's not a big worry usually with most things, but recessions can be a worry on the common stock side. But if you have the right stock holdings, then it shouldn't be a big worry there.
And Paul, thank you so much for calling in to our Ask Dave hotline with your question. And I want to encourage all of our listeners to call that number. It's 800-822-1111. If you have a question that you'd like to get answered on the show, or maybe you just want to get connected with one of our retirement income specialists, we can help you. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And today we're really focusing on those that are already in retirement, because there are certain things that can truly derail your retirement if you are not ready for them. And Dave, I apologize to our listeners. I jumped the gun a little bit there. The stock market crashing, a bear market, is a little bit different than a recession. It usually comes before the recession. But Dave, you did a great job of explaining the differences and how it can potentially affect people differently in a recession. So let's go over that again.
And again, I just want to be clear too that, some of these things we'll talk about later in the show are inflation, right? Yes, inflation can affect you, so you have to be worried. You have to be concerned about inflation. Pay attention to that in retirement, and have a buffer. You need to have a buffer, so if inflation is higher than you plan, you'll still likely be okay. Medical expenses, you have to plan, for those, of course, and also have a little buffer for increase in income taxes. And we have some strategies to protect you against income tax increase that we'll share later in the show. But you're right. The biggest thing, probably the reason you jumped on that, Sarah, is because everybody thinks about bear market. Everybody thinks about recession. It's different. A bear market is just a healthy pullback. We had one at the beginning of this year. The market was down, not a bear market, but a correction. It was down more than 10%. NASDAQ was down more than 20%, so it was a bear market. But it's because things got so ahead of themselves with prices going up.
Particularly in tech.
Yeah, when they pull back, it's just because market participants are saying, do I really want to buy it at these high levels? But the economy's still good. And that's where, I don't care whether your bonds and bond-like instruments, your common stocks, chances are your income's not going to change. You're fine. If you're living off just your income. Now, if you're using a withdrawal strategy, like we talked about that last week, how bad withdrawal strategies are. If you're using a withdrawal strategy, well, now it affects your retirement because now you're withdrawing off a smaller asset base because the investment's dropped in value. But if you're using an income-first capital appreciation mindset where you have enough interest and dividends being spun off to retire, well, then a bear market shouldn't affect you. The recession, though, like we said, could, because although bonds and bond-like instruments typically have a fixed interest payment, right, or a fixed dividend that's stated on the instrument, whereby the only time they can lower the income is essentially if they're going bankrupt.
Right. It's a contractual investment.
That's right. It's contractual. So if you've done your credit analysis well and you're dealing with stable companies, you should be okay. But on the common stock side, that's where there's the risk in terms of an actual recession, because healthy companies can cut their dividends. Why? Just because they decide that, hey, we're in a recession now, we're going to bring less revenue in, so let's cut the dividends so we could pay down our debt. And that's good. And they might stay in business, right? They may not fail, but they can cut the dividend. The extreme example was during the financial crisis where, all the financial companies, most of the big companies didn't fail, but they still cut their dividends because they didn't know what was happening, right? So this is where you need to have a buffer. The best thing is to have a buffer, have more income than you need in retirement. So if dividends get cut on the common stock side, you're okay. I always talk about trying to have enough income to meet your I need goals with just bonds and bond-like instruments, and the difference between the I need and the I want, if those are funded with common stocks, well, then the world's not going to end if we have a true recession. Coming up, we're going to talk a lot more about some of these other things that can derail a successful retirement. So stay tuned. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
We appreciate you spending some time here with us today on the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we've been focusing on things that can actually derail your retirement, particularly for all of our listeners that are in retirement. And there's really 5 big things that can derail it, depending on how you're invested and how you're prepared for retirement. So one of the first things, Dave, you mentioned the bear market cycle when the stock market is down. Then we have a recession, which I think a lot of people worry about those top 2 things. Right. In addition addition to that, there's medical expenses, there's inflation concerns, and of course, people worry about paying too much tax in retirement. Right. But going back to the first two, right, the bear market cycles when the stock market is down, as well as recession, there are ways that you can help hedge against both of these issues if you're investing for income the right way. So let's talk about how you can determine how much you need to achieve your goals in retirement, not have to worry about these things.
Yeah, I mentioned it briefly right before the break, and I know last week we spent some time on the show with this. And I always talk about my I need and I want goals. How much income do you need to live the same lifestyle you have today? And how much income do I want to live the desired lifestyle in retirement? So I need goals are best determined, and again, it's based on the same lifestyle you have today. They're best determined by saying, okay, let me take my income when I was working, subtract from it the expenses that are going to go away, like the FICA taxes that you don't have to pay when you're retired, like your 401k contributions you're not going to make when you're retired, or any savings you may not make because you're not getting a paycheck, right? Or maybe any debt payments you may not make if you plan to sell the asset or get them paid off. When you subtract those expenses that are going to go away from your pre-retirement income, you get these I need income goal, right? But then that assumes that the extra 8 to 10 hours you have in your day doesn't get filled with anything except sitting home and watching television, right?
That doesn't sound very fulfilling in retirement.
That's right. Yep. And more time on your hands means you're going to want to do more things. Doing more things means it's going to cost you more money. So you're going to want to spend more money. And that's where you've got to now pile on top of those I need income goals, the extra things you want to do and how much they cost, and get to the I want goals. And the bottom line is, if you're covering the I need goals through bonds and bond-like instruments, as you said before the break, contractual investments, right? And then you take your high dividend common stocks for the difference between the income you need for the I need and the I want goals. Now, if the stocks do cut dividends a little bit, it may take away some of your I want goals, but it's not going to take away the I need goals. It's not going to cut into the bone when it comes to expenses, right? And, you know, for some, they may just not need to maximize income from all the investments, in which case you can turn around and say, well, I can have the stocks for extra for an inflation hedge because I can hit my I want goals through all the bonds and bond-like instruments. And that's fine. But if you're not that fortunate, then, again, you want to make sure that you got your I need income goals covered through the stuff that's contractual. And then you can take a little bit more risk and get a little more capital appreciation potential with those extras because, again, doesn't cut into the bone.
And I want to encourage our listeners, if you are having trouble getting started or if you're wondering if it's maybe not too late to ever switch to an income specialist, you can always call in to our Ask Dave hotline, and that phone number is 800-822-1111. We would love to hear from you if you have a question for the show or if you just want to be connected with our retirement income source advisors located in Connecticut. We have a call here from Zachary in Connecticut who had called in earlier. He says, I'm really worried about my medical expenses in retirement. It's extremely hard for me to estimate what it would look like even 15 to 20 years from now. How much of a buffer would I need?
Okay, medical expenses in retirement. How much of a buffer? All right, well, it depends. You don't need a buffer if you've planned properly with the insurances. So, for example, what do I mean by that? Well, and now is Zachary, right?
Zachary, yes.
Is he retired or not retired?
He is already, it looks like he's already retired,
okay.
I think.
So, you know, the key is to plan before retirement, ideally, making sure you have the right medical insurance because Medicare Part A, which is hospital coverage, is free. Medicare Part B, which is doctor's visits, you have to pay for. Medicare Part B, but it's a fixed cost unless you're a high income earner in retirement, then you have to pay this IRMA tax, which basically increases the cost of Medicare Part B. But most people have A and B out of the way. And Part B payments, those premium payments come right out of your Social Security check, right? So that's easy. But there's lots of deductibles and co-insurances that Medicare Part A and B don't cover. And frankly, convalescent care is only covered for 100 days. And after that, any convalescent care or home health care is on you, right? So what do you need to do? Well, first you need to look at Medicare Part C or a Medicare supplement plan. Don't want to get in the details, but you need Medicare Part C or supplement. If you have enough income, a supplement typically is better and more flexible. A Medicare Part C can work, but it's typically an in-network program to cover deductibles and co-insurances, right? But then you have to get prescriptions covered. So if you have a Medicare supplement plan, maybe you have prescriptions covered. If you have Medicare Part C, then maybe you need to look at Medicare Part D to cover prescriptions. All right. So now once you have all that out of the way, now you've got all the basic medical stuff with very little out-of-pocket cost. But how about convalescent care? Again, even with all the exceptions, the best Medicare can do is cover you for 100 days of convalescent facility care or home health care. And usually it's convalescent facility. So now you have to look at long-term care insurance options, right? But Zachary, if you've covered yourself with Medicare Part A and B and Part C or a Medicare supplement plan or maybe C and D, and you've covered yourself with long-term care insurance, now you don't have to worry about having extra income to buffer those medical expenses at all. If you have gaps in those coverages, however, now you need a buffer. So, Zachary, stay tuned. We're to talk more about this as well as other risks coming up in retirement.
Absolutely. And Zachary, thank you for calling in to our Ask Dave hotline. If you have a question for the show, or maybe you just want to be connected with one of our retirement income source specialists in Connecticut, all you have to do is give us a call and leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 800-822-1111. Thanks for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we've been talking about the 5 factors that could potentially derail your retirement. So we're looking at stock market drops. We're looking at recession. We were just talking about medical expenses, but there's also things like inflation and taxes that can derail your retirement if you're not truly prepared. And Dave, you just answered a question from Zachary. That was a great question about medical expenses, because I feel like a lot of our listeners, maybe they know their medical history, but it's so difficult for people to think abstractly about, okay, well, how long am I really going to live? And what are those years going to look like for me medically?
Okay. It's so hard. My responses for every Ask Dave are usually a lot shorter. That was a longer response, and it's longer because it is more complicated. It's not as easy as having one medical plan through your employer. And Part A and B is pretty easy and pretty turnkey, but the other ones aren't. And it's tough. Again, if you want more flexibility, Medicare supplement plans can give you that flexibility, traveling out of the country and everything else. If you're more budget conscious, you get that Medicare Part C, then called Medicare Advantage, and now you have in-network provisions. So now you can only really have these costs covered if you're staying in network. And there's exceptions when you're out of the country and other places, but it gets really sloppy. So those are fine if you're on a really, really tight budget. But if you have enough income, or you have extra income in retirement, where you can afford what we call the Cadillac version, then you can get the Cadillac version. You can get some prescription coverage wrapped in there, so now you don't have to worry about Medicare Part D, right? And then the last and toughest decision for everyone is what to do in case of convalescent care, what to do in case of extended home health care. And that's expensive. So the earlier you are to look at that, the better off. If you can buy that when you're still working, you can. But you're going to have supplemental income in retirement to pay those premiums. So again, you've got to have either extra income then, or you have to have extra income now. And there's some plans out there, Sarah, where you can actually prepay it, where you can actually pay it for a limited number of years before retirement and have it mostly paid off. So those are attractive options today for people to look at. But bottom line, don't bury your head in the sand when it comes to covering yourself from medical catastrophes, and especially don't bury your head in the sand when it comes to convalescent care, because those costs can be astronomical.
Yep. And there are ways to help guard against our 2 next big risk factors that we'll discuss, including inflation and taxes. But again, it all starts with investing for income the right way. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you've been listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And today we've been talking about the 5 retirement risk factors. These are the 5 things that if you don't plan for properly, they could really derail your retirement. We've talked about stock market drops. We've talked about recession. We've talked about paying for medical expenses. But one of the main things that I think people worry about, especially our listeners, Dave, is inflation. Just because we've seen so much consumer inflation the last year or so, right. It seems like everything is getting more and more expensive. And I think our listeners that are looking down the pipeline at 10, 20 more years of retirement are worried about how they can have a buffer against future inflation.
Yeah, inflation's a hot topic, no question. And there are really 2 ways to do it the safer way is to have extra income generated than you want in retirement in your early years. And that's, of course, through the interest and dividends, the income component, and have it generated so you can reinvest it. Because now you're increasing next year's income, and you're doing it organically. You're doing it the old-fashioned way by reinvesting interest and dividends and buying more shares. That's exactly what that is. So, that's the best way. If you can get all your inflation hedged that way, Sarah, then you get all your inflation hedged with just being conservative, but taking that extra income and reinvesting it. Now, the problem is, you might get 6% income. You might be able to spend 3 and reinvest 2 or 3, and that'll be great through most inflationary times, right? But even that won't completely suffice in times like what we've seen recently with higher inflation. So, what else can you do? Well, the other thing you could do is you can go on the more stock-based side. So you can do bond-like stocks that can give you an inflation hedge, right? So we talk about bonds and preferreds all the time, who really aren't designed for an inflation hedge or capital appreciation unless you're reinvesting the income. But now we're talking about, okay, capital appreciation. What if you retire and you need all your income that your investments are generating in the early years of retirement? Well, then, how do you get capital appreciation? Through stocks, through bond-like stocks, and through regular stocks. So the first thing is through bond-like stocks, things like some business development companies, maybe some real estate investment trusts that typically have some inflation proofing, right? Real estate rents typically go up over time, right?
Right, overall, yes. And you can count on that income typically as well.
That's right. When interest rates go up, BDCs income sometimes go up. Their variable rates, that's an inflation hedge. But then if getting out of the bond-like instrument side, even the higher dividend common stocks, healthy companies over time will raise their dividends. And that gives you an inflation hedge too. So again, bottom line is, number one, try to have excess income that you don't want in retirement that you can reinvest, but also have some bond-like equities or even dividend common equities in there that can help your income, your actual income that's being spun off, increase also.
Yep. And if you're looking for a retirement income specialist in the area that can help you with these things, I encourage you to call that Ask Dave hotline so our team can connect you with a retirement income source specialist in Connecticut. That phone number is 800-822-1111. And Dave, we've talked about a lot of factors that you can plan ahead for, but our next Ask Dave question comes from someone who's worried about something you maybe can't plan ahead for. So this comes from Jamie. He says, we're planning for our retirement. I think he's part of a couple here, but we're planning for retirement, and I feel like we've prepared for all of those different factors. The one thing that we're worried about is taxes going up because I can't control it. What do you think we should be doing?
All right, Jamie. Well, you're right. That's one thing that you can't totally plan for, right? I don't know if you listened last week, Jamie, we talked about how a lot of people are concerned about a lot of these things, and they shouldn't be if they're living off the interest and dividends, because, again, now you're not so worried about bear markets. You're not worried about recessions very much at all. If you plan in advance, you've covered the medical part of it. If you've done the things I just talked about, you've covered the inflation part, but taxes are the wild card. So the best thing you can do is be tax diversified. Just like we want to be risk diversified with your investments, you want to be tax diversified. So what do I mean? Well, you have taxable accounts where you pay tax on the interest and dividends every year, but withdrawals on those are usually tax-free because you pay taxes as you go along, or maybe a little bit of capital gains tax, which is at a lower rate. Then you have those that are tax deferred, like 401ks and IRAs, where every dime you pull out in retirement is taxable. And then you have those things that are tax-free, like Roth IRAs, right? So where the withdrawals are tax-free. So again, you want to be diversified. You want some money in regular taxable accounts, like brokerage accounts or bank CDs. You want to have some money in tax-deferred accounts, like 401ks and IRAs and 403bs. And you want to have some money in tax-free accounts, like Roth IRAs. So as you're planning, the best time to do this is probably now to get yourself more tax diversified. Take some of your newer contributions, put them in after tax, or put them in Roth IRAs. Now you can diversify yourself better if you're lopsided toward tax deferred. If you're really close to retirement, you don't have a lot of time, then you need to look at some Roth conversion analysis. And so, Jamie, I hope you stay with us for the rest of the show because, again, we're going to talk about more about how to protect yourself from tax increases in the next few minutes. So stay with us.
And Jamie, we appreciate you calling into the Ask Dave hotline. Again, that phone number is 800-822-1111. And we want to encourage our listeners to call in with your questions for the show, or maybe you just want to be connected with a retirement income source advisor in your area. Our team can help you. You've been listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And there are 5 main risk factors that could potentially derail your retirement. We've been talking about them today. The stock market drops, recession, rising medical expenses, inflation, and of course, taxes. And Dave, you just mentioned a great way that you can diversify your taxes, just like diversifying your risk. And you talked about the 3 different buckets, if you will, right? We have the taxable accounts, we have the tax deferred accounts, and of course, the tax-free accounts. But maybe you can outline for our listeners that haven't yet diversified their taxes, steps that they could take now to do this.
Right. And so if you're still working, I think Jamie was working and still working, with several years to go, you can start putting after-tax contributions into 401ks. Some companies actually have a Roth 401k side where you could put money in, it grows tax-free, and you still get your match. So if you're lopsided toward the tax-deferred side, as many people are, now you're building up some tax-free money. If you don't have a Roth version, you could usually put after-tax contributions in, and any matching will get added on that. But then when you retire, you can typically roll over the after-tax side to a Roth IRA. So you can back into it. Also, if you're below the income limits for making Roth IRA contributions, you could actually make Roth IRA contributions while you're working. So take advantage of those last few years you have left to really balance it out between tax-deferred and tax-free. You want some in taxable. Regular taxable, because lump sum purchases, right? We talk about that all the time. You want to buy a car or something. You need some in taxable accounts, not just tax deferred and tax free.
Of the penalty if you were to withdraw money from that account.
Right. Yeah. But most should be tax deferred and tax free and having that diversified. So that hopefully answers the question for those of you who aren't retired yet. But what if you're really close to retirement or are retired? Now what can you do? Well, the next steps are now to look at Roth IRA conversions. And they're not for everyone, because when you take a regular IRA, regular 401k, and you convert it to a Roth, you have to pay taxes on the amount that you convert. The beauty of it, though, is for most people in retirement, you can be making over $100,000 if you're married filing jointly and still be in a 12% tax bracket under current tax law. And then the brackets go up slowly from there. So for many people, they can do some conversions each year in retirement at a reasonable tax rate and slowly over time re-diversify that money. So if you're retired or close to retirement, all is not lost. A good income specialist can help you with a Roth conversion strategy.
And most importantly, I think maybe a 6th risk factor is when you don't do anything, right? And that's why we encourage all of our listeners to take action. If any of these scenarios sound like something you're dealing with or something that you're worried about, we would love to hear from you. Again, you can call that Ask Dave hotline. The phone number is 800-822-1111. And we appreciate you listening to today's episode of the Retirement Income Source.
We absolutely do appreciate you being here. And hopefully you'll be here with us next week, same time, same station. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels. And you've been listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.